that any member of the public wishing to speak further regarding an issue on the 2020 Budget Committee agenda for today may appear before Council at its meeting on August 6th, 2019 at 7 p.m. when the recommendations from this meeting will go forward for final consideration. If you wish to speak as a delegation, please sign the sheet located at the back of the room or notify the Clerk's Department no later than noon the day of the Council meeting. Any PowerPoint presentations must also be forwarded to the Clerk's Department no later than noon the day of the meeting. We have a couple of items on our agenda today, and I believe that Ray Green is going to begin with the discussion of the corporate leadership plan and the continuous improvement update. Welcome, Mr. Green.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Good afternoon. I'll start off because I'm going to talk about our efficiencies and things that we're doing in the leadership plan. You'll notice that the audience, which is usually occupied by a great number of directors and staff, I've suggested for efficiencies, they should stay at their desk, put it on YouTube, and they can, multitask. So, okay, that was a cheap one, but what the heck, eh? Before Nancy comes up to update you on the 2020 budget forecast, I'd like to, as I said, update you on the progress of our leadership plan. In 2017, Council set a guideline for an overall tax increase in the years 2018, 2019, and 2020 of being within the rate of inflation. And if you look at that same period, we have or will be opening 4 facilities, 2 of which are quite major. The new fire station in Ward 4 and the Southeast Center in Ward 3. And which will have a very dramatic. So when you recognize the challenge of restraint and expansion, they don't always work hand in hand. So as staff, we recognize that we still needed to achieve Council's goals. So we started working on what we've seen as a leadership plan, which was looking at opportunities for efficiency and opportunities for innovation. Admittedly, at this point in time, we're working more on the efficiency side than the innovation. That doesn't say we're not doing other things that are making changes, but at this point in time, it's mostly on the efficiency and how we can stay within the guidelines of Council. In the 2018 budget, I committed to undertaking these review of all of our town's services and programs. In doing so, we retained very late in 2017 some assistance from KPMG to help inventory all of our services along with town staff, as well as do some very high-level benchmarking of comparator costs with other municipalities. The service inventory was to help us set priorities for this next role. It was not a large assignment, and it was really to help staff give us guidance. We were looking at them as a third eye who also had a methodology which we could employ to put some rigor to our review. In the past, we've done several, since I've been CAO, we've done a number of service reviews, and we've done them internally. But as we have gone down that path of looking at our operations and making changes, the certainly low-hanging fruit had all been taken in previous years. So we felt this time there needed to be some additional work done. And we have to recognize that 2020 especially is going to be a challenging year, as I say, with the opening of those new facilities, but it's also going to be a year which is the first full year of your strategic priorities. So we need to create room to bring things in. And we look forward to doing that on behalf of Council. Of course, a lot of the work that we have been doing this past year, we hadn't quite anticipated the additional challenges that the province has brought us. And there's no question what we are seeing coming through at the provincial level will challenge the town. In fact, it's going to, in my view, impact our fiscal flexibility. It'll probably start attacking our strong reserves, and it's going to be more difficult to address some of the issues that we have in this current environment. So in addition to what we were planning to do, we now see we have more to do with the province. But as staff, we are committed to maintaining a high level of service. I think that has always been something that is a priority to staff, and we know it's the priority of council. In fact, in 2012 was our last major service review. In fact, we brought to you a report as part of the 2020 budget process that looked at all of the services provided by the town through the various service areas. And it was acknowledged in there that many of our services were provided at a higher level. At that time, the review with council, even though things were at a higher level, council confirmed the levels of service that we were providing. They did not look for any change. Now, recognizing that there was still a need to deal with fiscal accountability and to meet council's fiscal goals, in 2013 and 2014, we, working as staff internally, again, without assistance from outside, found over $3 million in efficiencies that we brought forward that were incorporated into the 2015 budget. Now, you see with my notes, I try not to read too much because my reading actually stinks. So I highlight trigger words. But for the next couple of paragraphs, I actually want to read because I want you to get the full gist of what I'm going to say. The reality is that Oakville has more green space, including both parks and trails, to maintain than most other communities. We have more ice rinks. We have larger facility offerings. We offer a diverse range of programs from sports to arts to music to culture to summer camps to 2 beautiful harbors. We have residents who want the town to offer a wide variety of programs and camps, and they like them in their neighborhoods, not just in a center. The state of good repair of our municipal assets is second to none. All as a result of a robust asset management program. For example, the town is moving towards 0 deficiencies in our road pavement quality index by 2025. That's something that municipalities do not try to achieve. Our 1% capital tax levy, which has been in place since 1997, is now contributing $36 million annually. This amount is equivalent to our depreciation for all of our town assets. This is pretty much unheard of in the public sector. The town in 2015 was able to contribute $130 million to the construction of a new hospital, $40 million in cash, the remainder through debt financing. Admittedly, there was great debate at the time, but once the dust settled, the decision was made to contribute, and we were able to do so without negatively affecting our services or our high level of commitment to the public. This commitment to high standard of service is reflected in our comparative costs. Our desire for service excellence, I believe, is both a commitment of council and staff. But that doesn't mean we're not going to look at our services. In fact, it's in my view, given what is going on in the economy through this country and the concerns about a recession coming, we do need to find opportunities to do things differently. I can honestly say with a great deal of pride that I've worked with each council since 2006 on ensuring that the services that we provide to our citizens are of great value and value for money. We are actively pursuing the opportunities identified in the KPMG report and will be reporting back to this committee in the fall with our preliminary results so that we can prioritize these programs so that we can continue to deliver our services. For a moment, I'd like to speak to the KPMG report. As I said, in the past, we've done these without assistance from outside. This time, because we have got a lot on our plates, we felt it was better to have a third party work with us. In fact, as I said, they have a defined methodology. It was a methodology that we employed, which was of assistance, but it was working with staff that got us the results that are prioritized in the KPMG report. In addition, they did provide our staff with a high-level benchmarking comparison of a number of municipalities. Now, these comparisons, I have to tell you, this is your FIR reports that go to the province. This is self-reporting information. So this is not, it's high level, it goes to the province. We get to submit it in how we believe it fits into the provincial requirements, but there's no standardization there. So you have to take it as simply a high-level report. And it doesn't necessarily take into account where and how money is spent. It's just giving dollar values. But it is a starting point, and it gave us an opportunity to get going on our project. What I want to stress to you, that is not a line by line. In fact, when you look at what the province is asking municipalities to do, it is to use the FIR reports. In fact, literally, if you look at the work that was done by Ernst Young that identified, it was a fairly simplified review that the province undertook as well. But it's a starting place. So at this point, it would be appropriate, Mr. Chair, if I invite Nancy to start into the presentation, the forecast, and at the end, we'll answer questions, obviously, on all the documents before you.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Today I'll provide an overview of the preliminary 2020 budget. We're just at the start of the process, but wanted to bring forward where we are right now to Council. So just as Ray said, Council directed us to prepare the 2018, 19, and 20 budgets, keeping an overall increase in line with inflation. So for 2020, our target is 2%. This requires, right now, the presentation that you'll see today assumes a regional increase of 2.3%. That is the increase that they identified in their 2019 budget for 2020. They are reporting to their council tomorrow, and I believe their increase is now projected to be 2%. So while it shows here that we would need to be capped at 2.8 to bring that overall increase in line at 2%, it would actually be about 3.1% that we could go to. So just an overview of our budget process. The budget takes many months to prepare. So during the spring, finance, we've been going through updating the 2020 forecast, applying inflation, just all of the tweaking that we need to do, and that's what's before you today. We're now starting the process with the departments, so they have begun looking at their budgets. They're looking at where they need to spend more, where they can spend less, what inflationary increases, their revenue adjustments, etc. That takes place over June to August. During September, there's quite a detailed review that takes place, both with finance and the departments. We look at it department by department, what the overall increase looks like. We then bring that to executive management team, and we have several meetings in October where we review the budget in quite a bit of detail and make decisions on the staff recommended budget. We go away and prepare the budget documents, and then late October, November, we will present the 2020 budget, the 2-year forecast, as well as the capital budget, and budget approval in December. So the budget meetings have already been set. November 19th, we will release the operating and capital budgets, as well as our rates and fees. On November 21st, staff presentations. December 3rd, there are 2 meetings, one during the daytime, one in the evening for public delegations. Budget deliberations and recommendations are scheduled for December the 10th, and council approval of the budget December the 16th. So the 2020 operating budget. Our base budget, there are many pressures that go along with it. We have our personnel increases based on our approved contracts or negotiated settlements. Those have had to be incorporated. We have our capital levy that is in there. We have to look at our economic conditions, what's out there. You know, the inflationary pressures, the tariffs are now coming off, but still the US dollar, how that affects some of our goods and services, the cap and trade on the fuel, all of those types of things. So our base budget does include adjustments for salary, wages, and benefits. It does have the annualized impact of the 16 Mile Branch Library, which opened this year, as well as new parks and trails, the annualization of the municipal enforcement strategy, as well as adjustments to fuel, utilities, and some preliminary adjustments to our user fees. The budget also includes $4.2 million of growth and capital impacts. This includes the Southeast Community Center and Fire Station 8. Ray mentioned that we are opening 2 major facilities in 2020. They will have partial year impacts and the full impact in 2021. As well, we have various parks and parkettes, including Neighborhood Park 3 in the north, new roads that are assumed through subdivision development or town widenings, vehicle and equipment purchases, specialized transit, and software enhancements. This just shows you the major drivers in the preliminary budget. So the largest increase is in emergency services at $2.6 million. This includes contractual increases for firefighters, as well as the partial year impact for Fire Station 8 and some service enhancements. Our corporate revenue and expenses, right now it's showing a $1.47 million increase. That's primarily due to the capital levy and then some adjustments in our revenues. Recreation and culture, the third largest increase at this time. That reflects the opening of Southeast Community Center, and it also includes the elimination of the $500,000 in stabilization funding that was put in 2018. So this chart shows you how we come up with the projected increase, and this, I would remind you, is the increase before staff go through the budget process and finalize everything. So it is very much preliminary. Our economic step increases, $3 million, account for 1.52% on our tax levy. We have other inflationary impacts, revenue adjustments, the annualized impact of 2019 services that I mentioned, and the annualization of some operating efficiencies from last year. That brings our existing base budget increase to $3.3 million, or 1.69% on the tax levy. We then have that almost $4.2 million in new infrastructure. And then what we've done over the past 2 years, we've deferred some assessment growth. I think through the last 2 budgets, we've talked about the need to line the assessment growth with the cost of delivering the new services for residents. So our assessment increase has been higher, but we've been assuming 1%. That additional amount through the budget recommendations has gone into tax stabilization. And as a result, we are able to bring in almost $2.5 million in 2020. And that will offset the growth portion of those operating and capital increases. So that really is minimizing the impact on the 2020 budget. To date, we have found about $1.2 million in efficiencies towards our target that will be incorporated in the 2020 budget, an additional $200,000 for 2021. And this chart shows the assumption that we're taking all of the stabilization out and what would the increase look like. So right now we have found that 1.2 million, we need to find that difference. That's what staff will be working on over the coming months. That brings our base operating budget increase to about $6.4 million, or 3.24%. When we add the capital levy in, that adds an additional 1%, and then budget committee referrals or service enhancements add 0.27%. This brings our increase to $8.9 million, or 4.51% before 2020 assessment growth. And right now we are assuming 1%, which would then bring our overall increase for the town's portion of the bill at 3.51%. So this is just a visual of what I just took you through. The base budget increase is 3.24%. We add the capital levy and service enhancements, 1.27, take off the assessment growth, and that brings us to that 3.51%. Again, this slide needs to be updated. Unfortunately, it was too late to do it for the presentation today, but we will update it when we put it on the town website. So the town's increase right now projected at 3.51%. The region will actually be 2%, which would bring the overall increase to 2.18%. So I did, in conjunction with what Ray spoke about earlier, I did just want to take you through some of the efficiencies that we have identified over the past years and the work that we've done to date on the $2.1 million target. So we do have a history of looking for efficiencies and creating new ways of doing things to reduce our costs. The CAO did launch a review in 2014, which resulted in $3.1 million in efficiencies. These included things like staffing efficiencies, reductions to material supplies, It also took into consideration the realignment of the commission structure and reduced our commissioners from 4 down to 3. Work continues on every year as part of our budget, and between 2017 to 2019, an additional $4.4 million in efficiencies have been identified, and those are reported on through the annual budget process. This included our LED streetlight conversion program, which reduced our hydro costs by about $1.4 million. It also included transit efficiencies of $2.1 million, and this enabled transit to offer some service enhancements without impacting the tax levy. We also introduced RFID in the library and a print management system, which brought in about $200,000 in savings, as well as a look at some of our larger spending areas to reduce our costs. So overall, over that time period, we've found about $7.5 million in efficiencies. So as Ray said, he committed to, in 2019, we committed to finding $2.1 million in efficiencies, and we included $2.1 million in tax stabilization funding in anticipation of finding those savings. Ray, as he said, he committed to a review of all town programs and services, and that work is underway. We are expecting final recommendations on the 2 service reviews that have been undertaken to date, the recreation programming and our facilities management service delivery reviews. Those are nearing completion, and we will be reporting back on them later this year. And we do expect to see recommendations in there that will help assist us in moving towards finding our efficiencies. We are still waiting to hear from the province on our submission for funding under the Audit and Accountability Fund, and that was for a fleet utilization study and a call center consolidation review. So we are hoping to hear soon on those, as the deadline to complete them is November. We've also introduced Lean, and we introduced it in the town as a process to find smaller efficiencies and to embed continuous improvement in our departments. So it was a way to look for ways to sort of remove pain points. We have had numerous staff undertake Lean 101 sessions, white belt training, as well as yellow belt, and we are now about to start some green belt training in the fall. And in addition, we have asked all departments to look for efficiencies in their programs. So there are certain areas that are under review right now, but we want everyone to be looking because we need everyone to contribute to finding efficiencies to ensure that our taxes remain in line with inflation. So the efficiencies that have been identified to date total $1.4 million. $1.2 million of that would be reflected in the 2020 budget and the $200,000 in 2021. And they include the CAO's review of senior management and the changes that he made earlier this year. Visit Oakville town funding with the introduction of the municipal accommodation tax. They're able to remove that grant that was given to Tourism Oakville, as they now get 50% of the proceeds from that tax. In transit, with our software scheduling, it has allowed transit to increase their service delivery and provide efficiencies in the scheduling of our specialized transit service. This has allowed them to put more people onto our town vehicles and reduce the need for the taxi services. And as a result, anticipating about $150,000 reduction to the taxi budget in transit this year for 2020. There are staff scheduling efficiencies that have been undertaken, as well as staffing realignments to reflect program needs, where we're shifting them to where we need them, and a reduction to material supplies contracted services for $144,000. So I'll just briefly provide a little bit of information on the 2020 capital budget. So our capital budget is divided into 5 components. The first is infrastructure renewal, and that's ensuring that our assets are maintained in a state of good repair. We then have our growth budget, and that's new infrastructure required as the town grows. We have our strategic priorities, so that is initiatives that achieve a council's strategic goals. Our community enhancements, which are improvements or enhancements that may not be totally driven by growth, but more driven by community need or desire, and our enterprise initiatives, which include harbors, cemeteries, and parking. So the preliminary 2020 capital budget right now totals $147.2 million. $52 million of that is for infrastructure renewal, $70 million for growth, Our strategic priorities at just about 16 million, community enhancement 7.5, and our enterprise initiatives. And this chart shows the top highest dollar value projects in the 2020 capital budget. The bulk of them are roads projects, includes 6th Line to Dundas, the downtown Lakeshore Road, the second phase of the funding for that, road resurfacing, all the way down to our EAB program and our forestry. And again, this is the preliminary capital budget. Staff are now reviewing all of the projects and the costing. So there are several pressures on the capital budget, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about them because I think they're going to prove very difficult as we go forward in our financial planning. The first and the largest, I would say, is Bill 108. So the proposed changes to the Development Charges Act under Bill 108, which will remove the DC funding for the soft services, it creates a lot of uncertainty for us. We know through the draft regulations that we will not be able to collect for soft services beginning January 1st, 2021. We will need to have a new community benefit charge in place in order to collect for not only soft services in our DCs, but the parkland contribution we would have got or any Section 37. The difficulty we have, of course, is that there are some draft regulations out there, but they provide very little details to us. They have not worked through the calculation on how the charge will work. The intent is stated to keep us whole, but again, without knowing any of the details, it's very difficult to know whether that will be the case. There's also the concern about cash flow and the funding. So, you know, commercial, industrial, not-for-profit, commercial industrial be phased in over 6 years. So instead of collecting that money when they pull the building permit, we're now going to have to bill them and charge them over 6 years. It's going to create an administrative burden on the finance department along with other departments. IT changes in order to do all of that. And then our cash flow, because we won't know how much is coming in. For not-for-profit, over 20 years. So you can appreciate that's a long period of time to collect for something that you need up front when development's coming in. So we have that pressure. We also have the housing market. So we do monitor on an annual basis our development units compared to what the development charge study said, and we look at the timing, how it's coming in. When we do our budgeting, we know what the growth is expected over that time period, and we have estimates for the 10 years. Often it doesn't come in the way we expect. It will get there by the end, but in the meantime, if it's slower as it's been for us, it means we've had to push some projects out. Now we have the whole issue of not only of it being slower, but not even knowing what our revenue sources are going to be as we go forward. And again, the construction prices. So the construction price index has been about 5.2% in first quarter. That puts a lot of pressure on our costs for our programs and services. So as a result of all of the uncertainty, we are going to focus on our 2020 budget for capital this year. To do a 10-year forecast and update it at this point would be very difficult because we don't know what the revenue sources are. We don't know how to anticipate what the cash flows will be. So until we get more information on that, we're going to focus on 2020. The other concern we have, when we do our development charge study, we have an expectation of how much revenue will come in. We know those units are going to get built. Sometimes we will fund projects earlier on, knowing that that revenue is going to come in. So while our development charge reserves as a whole are positive, some areas will be negative and then it eventually catches up. This is particularly true in our soft services. So our Parks and Rec development charges are right now sitting at $38 million negative. That wouldn't be so much of a concern under the current regime of development charges because we know that growth's coming and it would work out. But now the rules have changed midstream and we don't know what's going to happen. The draft regulations are silent right now on what happens to a negative reserve that you have. So one of the things that we are going to do as staff is look very closely at the projects in our 2020 capital budget to look at what really has to be done and what can be deferred, because we need to really get that balance down closer to zero before the regime changes. The other uncertainty, and it's not too bad for Oakville, but I would suspect for some municipalities it'll be quite concerning, is what happens with debt. So you can issue debt in anticipation of future development charges. We did it for 16 Mile Community Center. The town has been very prudent in the amount of debt that they have issued in anticipation of future development charge collections. Our 16 Mile debt ends in March 31st, 2020. So there's a 3-month window. There'll be a debt charge payment where we're not collecting from DCs. The current draft regulations are silent on what happens with that. So that's another thing that we'll be watching as staff as we go forward. So that sort of negative note to end my presentation. I apologize for that. But that is the end of the presentation, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Did you wish to cover off briefly the shovel-ready project as well?
Certainly, through you, Mr. Chair. There is a report in the agenda, item 3, which gives you an updated listing of shovel-ready projects. We have, from time to time, brought a list to council. And really what it is a list that should there be infrastructure funding programs that come out, we have developed a list of the types of projects that would be eligible for submission. So we really did it based on the categories that they had come up with through the last funding program, so public transit, green programs, and social infrastructure. So this is really for information purposes, and identifies some of the projects, what the estimated budget cost would be, and the time it would take to make it shovel-ready should a program become available.
Thank you very much. Are there questions from members of the committee? No? Councillor Lischino?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Nancy, for that comprehensive presentation. I'd like to go back to Mr. Green's comment, just that, so KPMG is doing this work for us. Do you know if they're doing it for any other municipality in our comparator group?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe they've actually done work in each of these over the past few years. And KPMG's assignment was really just to get us going. They are not in this service review doing any further work with us. So it was the report that we have here, that was us having a starting point. And that's what I was looking for, as opposed to staff on its own getting up to speed.
Okay. So thank you. So I guess my next question is for Nancy Sully, is regarding the infrastructure renewal. You have noted the $52 million that have been earmarked for that. I recall in the 2019 budget, Councillor Adams had asked about having a look again at the road resurfacing program. Is that going to be included in the 2020 budget to see if we have a very high standard for that? And that's already also noted here, I think on page 69 of the KPMG report. So is that going to be included as the part of the 2020 budget with respect to that standard, or no?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we will look at our service levels in that area. That'll be one of the things as we complete the capital budget that we'll be looking at.
So that the 52 million right now, that's not including that yet?
No, it does include the money for road resurfacing, the annual contribution, $10 million.
Okay.
We will need to do further analysis, but we really need to do it as part of our infrastructure, our asset management program, because we really need to look at where do we need to spend the money. It may be that our roads, we could reduce that level of service, but we know there are other areas, stormwater that comes to mind, other areas where we may need to spend more money. So we need to look at it as a whole.
Thank you.
Great.
Mr. Green?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The other thing I think we have to look at very carefully, and it's why Nancy has spoke to only really dealing with 2020, because if the provincial changes are leaving us with a deficit in our soft services, and I can't believe that this is a municipality that will just want its soft services to end in terms of and so we may have to look at mixing and matching things in those years beyond. So I think for 2020, I think we've got the preliminary budget for capital is prudent. I'd like to think we'll have another look at it just to make sure. But I think what changes, depending on what the province does and what DCs and making municipalities whole, and this, cash flowing of the DCs from the commercial industrial could have a very dramatic change. Now, it probably would start pushing us back to levels of service that probably many other municipalities are doing, and so are enhancing. You know, I'm not trying to suggest we're going to be in the poorhouse, but I think the level of service that we've been enjoying for years may have to taper off.
Thank you very much for that additional information.
Councillor Chisholm?
Through you, Mr. Chair. In the KPMG report, there's 75 opportunities, and well, I guess in consultation with KPMG, that we've come down to 10 opportunities. Those opportunities, are they in the implementation stage now, or being discussed with staff and being part of the 2020 budget?
So the top 10, so the 2 service reviews we're undertaking, they were top 10, and the 2 that we've now submitted for are also in that top 10. We are going through all those other opportunities. Those are all opportunities that were through this KPMG process. They take you through a methodology. They use it with many municipalities. They've done it all over. And you come up with your opportunities. But all of those are just that, opportunities that you need to look at and do a deeper dive in to see whether or not they make sense or whether they create efficiencies. So that work is ongoing, but it won't all be done for 2020. It's an ongoing program.
Just a second
I
question.
think Mr. Green has
Well,
some
just to
additional-
add, of course, the top one, that number 1 and 2 are the highest opportunities, and the opportunities taper off quite quickly as you go down the list. So if you look at a number 4 versus a number 10, this one could be worth, 300,000, and all of a sudden you're down to 15. So the idea is to go for the higher ones up front.
Understanding, with all the concerns and risks we have right now based on Bill 108, all these efficiencies or opportunities will continue on as we go. But I would probably agree with Ray with respect to enhancements would probably be almost diminished with respect to what's coming down the pipe. So with that in mind, I'll be looking at, let's maintain our risk, watch our risk with respect to this. And unfortunately, I think, and it's just me speaking in my past, is that we have to look at maintaining what we've got and mitigate risk and wait till it happens with Bill 108. And I'm really concerned with respect to the what we call the soft services, unbuilt communities. We're doing this, and now the money's not there for a recreation facility or a library, or lack of thereof. So, thank you.
It's good feedback. Any others? Go ahead.
So I have a couple questions just about process. So I see the timing window, and all I did was sit last year, brand new, and listen to sort of how it flowed. Are the presentations planned to be any different for this coming budget cycle in terms of, for example, you've got Planet and you've got these service reviews, and there's a lot more detail behind some of the efficiencies that you're looking for. Is it intended that the commissioners will speak to that as well as what they did last year in terms of just their overall commission?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we haven't had a lot of discussion yet on what the process will look like, but I do anticipate that there will be more detailed information in the presentations. We have made a commitment that we'll report back on the service reviews that have been undertaken. I would see that done as part of the budget, so there would be some detailed information. But I'm not sure if Ray wants to speak to that.
And I'd like to think that we'll be able to give you more comprehensive reports which deal with these other matters. So certainly the presentations, I do agree with this council, given its expansion, given that you're in a new term, will have to be different than what we did last year, which was really just a pat budget going forward into 2019. But you can expect a different core of reports coming forward that deal with all these projects that we're dealing with.
Okay, thank you for that. My other questions are just in terms around the public, and I mean, there are those windows, but when you look at the timing from start to finish, from November to December, am I right? We've got about 4 weeks in which somebody might become aware of, okay, here's what we're recommending, here's the discussion points, and then you're to decision. And is there again, it's a naive question, but is there a communication plan around ensuring people understand the tightness of that window? Because it does seem a little tight. From a resident perspective, and I'll always have a resident hat on, sorry, it feels like that's a lot of information to take in. And and there's usually a lot of asks, we'd like this, we'd like that, and they get caught with, well, hold on, we didn't know you had that ask. And we know, even I know, based on what you've just told me today, there's not a lot of room for asks, but they're still gonna have them. So can somebody help me understand how we manage or plan to manage
Mayor
that
Burton, do you want to
dynamic?
speak to this point, or?
There's a meeting of the Community Leaders Roundtable at the end of this month, and we're gonna start right there with the budget messaging. And all of this material that you've had today, they're gonna have, and that gives them lots of times to share it with their members and their boards. Beg your pardon?
Who attends that?
The various community groups of Oakville have been meeting with me for about 10 years, the last Friday of every month. It's called, it's an informal thing, it's called the Community Leaders Roundtable. And they bring their issues and questions, and I bring my and council's information. And councilors can't attend because that would make it an illegal meeting.
That's right.
But
Sure.
councilors can have their own Community Leaders Roundtable in their own wards anytime they want.
So I'd add to this in terms of the communication process that happens during that time frame and a little bit in advance of it. There's often one-on-one discussions that I have with various members of the community and groups. I know that some other members of council have also had residents meetings where they'll have a special discussion about budget as one of their items or topics. They'll often do that in the time frame of October, November, consistent with the process that we're going into. Oftentimes they'll try to do it in November so that the budget book is out and available, and I know that our staff make themselves available for those things as well. We do have a communication plan, one of you was just lighting up your light to make mention of that, I think.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the other thing that we do, and we do this very early because we also have rates and fees, that is done quite early in the process. So community services, which to the largest extent deals with most of the rates and fees. All the sports groups, culture groups, the Oakville Arts Council, all of those groups are notified of the budget process, they're given the dates. Library does that with their patrons as well, so there's a comprehensive. I have to admit, when I reflect back probably over the last 5 or 6 budgets, even with all the work that we do, there's not a lot of attendance at the budget committee meetings. And, you know, if for some reason there's an extra amount of that, I think we always have that ability to try to work an extra meeting in there if we require it, a meeting or 2, really.
And then the last thing I'll offer is if there is something that you think we ought to be considering or contemplating in terms of that kind of outreach, I'd be happy to have a discussion with you to try to add it into our communications plan. Usually in the summertime leading up into September, I'll meet with our communications staff to talk about what kind of communications plan we want to have for the budget and setting up, for example, outreach evenings that are outside of the formal budget process, so that there's a walk-in process that people can come and have a casual conversation with staff in one of our meeting rooms or at one of our community centers, so that there's a quiet discussion that can be had. People can walk through a budget book with a member of staff or myself. Does Councillor Hazelfield, does that satisfy you for the moment?
No, it informs me, so thanks very much. My other 2 questions are, in terms of these opportunities that came up through KPMG, there are some in there that are, they're interesting. So even though you've identified the top 10, and I heard the message that, you know, there's clearly, we want to go after the ones that have a greater level of return. Simple things like electronic buses. I saw buses in the capital plan. We hear about it from the environmental and on the night of declaring a climate emergency. How is all that incorporated?
As you know, especially when you speak to issues like electric buses, I think when opportunities come for funding to assist in those areas, because when you look at an electric bus, standard bus today is $500,000, an electric bus equivalent is about $1 million. There is a lot of work that's being done on pilots and experimental. The technology obviously is quite advanced, but its use in Canada has been limited. There's hopes that with a federal provincial agreement that this opportunity will expand itself. There are a lot, so some of them will require to sit and wait to see when certain funding comes forward to exploit those opportunities. Other ones, some of the small ones there, as Nancy spoke to her in her presentation, with the lean, with the white belt, yellow belt, green belt. Some of those smaller ones, what we're encouraging are lean, especially the ones that are in the yellow belts and the ones moving for green. We're encouraging them to start looking at some of this list. And have you got 2 or 3 that you'd like to take on, given the training that you've had? Is there a team you can put together? So we're not ignoring, we're going for the higher ones, and those are the ones we're concentrating because we can move the needle with them. But through just general review training, the lean training, we're looking for all of those. So I'll commit to you that as that list, as we're going through, you will receive reports no matter how big or how small.
Very good. Councillor Robertson?
My question is, in terms of the mentality of residents, do you think residents anticipate that our taxes at the municipal level are going to compensate for what the province has done? So if we have an increase in tax base for the residents, they're going to say, yeah, that's because he's cut everything and it's downloaded to us, like soft services.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure how residents will take it. I'm not sure, until we actually see the regulations and understand the calculation of the charge and can quantify the financial impact it will have, it's difficult for the town to actually put that message out there, that what the impact is. But, and so at this point, I'm not sure residents would really understand. We need to get those regulations, understand the calculation, look at what that means to us, and communicate that back to council and the public.
It's an excellent question. I know that there has been some discussion of the need for a forward levy of funding Ontario through reductions in downloading tax, and so that's out there in the municipal world being discussed, and I'm sure there'll be more discussion of that over the next 18 months. So, others? Mayor Byrne?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the benefits, such as it is, of spending the afternoon yesterday with the Federal Minister of Infrastructure and Communities, François-Philippe Champagne, is he told me that there's $16 million earmarked, if you will, for Oakville, for transit specifically, in the federal infrastructure funds that have been granted to the province of Ontario, that the province of Ontario has not seen fit to release. And so, you know, you could have 16 electric buses if only the province would, and if that's what you wanted to spend it on in your transit needs, because I think we have to remember it's a decision for council, and there are other competing needs. And it may be that you need 32 buses instead of 16 buses, and you have to weigh that. But nevertheless, the point is that the money that the town manager just identified as needed to help us do that is tantalizingly sitting there, but unfortunately blocked for what look like political reasons.
Go ahead, Councillor Robertson.
What happens with anything like amalgamation? What happens with anything that he could potentially, like we plan a budget, but he potentially comes back and says, we're going to force fire to become regional in nature? What happens with your budget for something like that? Does that affect this year coming up, or does that affect a year from now?
Well, that's a difficult question in terms of timing, but if you look at most of our budgets, if it is a a severing of some of the services to combine them in a different fashion. Most of that can be disentangled. Of course, there's the tax issue and things like that. But, you know, we have had shifts before. For example, back in 1998 or in around, no, I guess it was 1990, yeah, 1998, sorry. Bill 10 was passed by the province, which amalgamated all the waste management. And it gave the rules by which we had to operate with and the timing, the commitments to labor and how that worked. So a lot of that was spelled out for us. And then we, as the 4 area municipalities, worked with Halton to ensure a smooth transition. So, but if you get into a full amalgamation, that's a whole different kettle of fish.
Mayor Burton, did you have a
Yes.
point on this?
I think the best answer for the councillor's question is that's up to them. That's up to the province, and it's their problem, actually. They could, and they have expressed an interest in so doing, create a city of Halton with a mayor and 6 councillors. And they would just say, everything in the local municipalities is now the province, the ownership of the new city of Halton, and spend the next year sweeping up the debris. We have to remember that the province has absolute power, and it, I think, behooves us to listen carefully to the things that they've said, and they've been actually pretty strong about too many politicians and too many layers, and the special advisors were, on their last day here, quoted as saying that there could be pretty big changes. So all we can do is put our faith in our own processes, prepare for what we want, and hope for the best. It is notable that more than 2,200 residents of Oakville have now written letters of protest at any thought of amalgamation. And the other 81 municipalities caught in this review have generated dozens, to give you some perspective. So we've certainly been noticed, and we'll have to, all we can do in the meantime is to keep on doing our job.
Sailing's report hasn't come out yet, which was supposed to be out by the end of June.
The minister has, the last word from the minister was, you're not going to hear anything until November. I repeat, the legislature's been put into hiding in order to try to prevent any further upset of the people. There's an election on for the federal government, and if you like, you can say the legislature is in the witness protection program.
Your specific question about the ceiling report, I'm told, and they said, that it's going to be confidential, it's going to cabinet, and none of us will ever get to see it. So, if you're done, then Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in the discussions with staff and the presentations and my fellow colleagues here, I'm going to use an old expression. I was an old hockey player, I used to be, is that it's a neutral zone defense we're going to play. We have to have a strong defense and be prepared for the power to come down on us, and make sure we pick up our checks and we keep them away from the goal. So at the end of the day, I think that's what we're going to be playing here, is a neutral zone defense. That's my last comment on that one.
Councillor, how's that feel?
I'm gonna have to start taking my hockey lessons. But I get the analogy. So, 2 more follow-ups. First of all, let me just comment on e-buses. I wasn't necessarily saying I'm endorsing that we need all e-buses, but there is money set aside in capital, and there is a misnomer out there that we might have electric buses, which we don't, and there's a misnomer about how much they cost, and I wish there was a way we could persuade the government to obviously free up that 60 million to decide what we do with it. I just wanted to understand transit in a bigger picture way, and at the last budget in 2019, or I guess late 18, I didn't see a comprehensive presentation from transit, and I just think given the magnitude of the impact, I wondered if that would be something we would see. There's an app out there that I know Director Cole feels could do some really great things around real-time scheduling and eliminate a need for investments in big buses. So I plant that seed as a possible ask. And the same thing is with the alternate transportation plan. I know that Director Stevens mentioned she would separate it out for this coming year, just so it was clear what are we investing in it. So I just wanted to bring those back full circle because they were things that came up last time round. The alternate,
Active transportation.
sorry, I
Yeah,
call
so-
it alternate.
So we had a discussion last budget season around the need to provide more detail and break out where the active transportation master plan funding was. And in specifics to this point, there was a issue around many of our active transportation dollars are within capital projects that are called roadway projects. And so you don't see that element broken out. And so we're gonna make a effort at being more transparent around that piece of it.
Right. Those were my comments and questions. Thank you very much.
Others? Then I think we are satisfied for the moment. Thank you very much, everyone, for the questions. The discussion was very helpful. We have 3 items that are within the agenda that need to be dealt with now. The first item is item number 1, the Corporate Leadership Plan Continuous Improvement Update. And can I have a motion to receive the report? Councillor Chisholm has moved that the report from the Acting Commissioner of Corporate Services and Treasurer be received. All those in favor? That's carried. Item number 2 is the 2020 Budget Forecasting Guidelines, and the recommendation from staff is that the report dated July 3rd, 2019 from the Finance Department be received. Can I have a motion to that? Councillor Robertson has moved that. All those in favor? That's carried. The last one is the 2019 Shovel Ready Project Update. The 2 recommendations are that the 2019 Shovel Ready Project List report dated June 26, 2019 from the Finance Department be received. And second, that the staff be authorized to proceed with project submissions for grant funding as programs are announced. Could I have a motion to that effect? Councillor Chisholm has moved that. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much, everyone. Over the next few months, we're going to be working behind the scenes with our staff to prepare the materials that are going to come forward in November. Mayor Burton, do you have a final comment?
Thank you. I'd just like to let the committee know and other members of council that I have distributed to your council information package a Moody's report that the Ford government cuts are going to blow a $2 billion hole in municipal budgets, and I recommend for your reading that material. Moody's is not an entity that I think I listen to them. I don't think they're a group that shouldn't be ignored. That's what I'll say.
I agree. Thank you for that reminder. So as I was saying, over the next couple of months, we're going to be working behind the scenes to prepare the materials that are going to be coming forward formally in November. If any of the members of committee or other members of council for that matter have either comments or questions or some input to that discussion so that we can prepare the communications plan, for example, that we discussed today, I'd be happy to have that conversation so that we can make it as good and transparent and accountable as we can. Okay? Thank you very much, everybody. There are no other items, and so we are now adjourned.